Hi, I'm Catherine Jordan. I am the Research and Development Manager here at Datalaw, and I am speaking with Samantha Pye, who is a Vice President of Global Professional and Financial Risk at Lockton, who are the UK's leading supplier of solicitor professional indemnity insurance. So, Sam, do people worry about the insurance implication of the new SRA changes?
There has been kind of a proven track record that some solicitors out there will scrap around at the last minute to make up their 16 hours of CPD, which isn't really any good to anyone and could be seen as a waste of time if you're not doing something that's relevant to your area of practice or indeed managing a law firm. So the fact that these changes are more reflective, and it doesn't matter how much you do, it's based on the quality and the relevance of what you do to ensure that you are continuing in your competence and you have the expertise to do the legal advice or give the legal advice that you're doing. So I think that firms should be aware of it, but of course there's potentially a regulatory risk. So you could have a situation where if a solicitor completely abuses the fact that they don't have to do 16 hours of CPD, but they have to demonstrate that they're competent, you could have a potential conflict where they've declared to the SRA that they've undertaken no CPD because they don't believe they need to do any training. But what if the regulator disagrees? Would the individual solicitor potentially have a disciplinary action made against them, or would it be imputed to the entity itself? So I think there are a few things to worry about.
Oh, that was brilliant. I think our concern has been, obviously, it is a massive shift from, the old scheme by no means was perfect, but it was easy to comprehend in terms of what people needed to do, and it was easy to just go away and do that. And obviously, as you said, we've experienced the sort of scramble, sort of on the 31st of October for, anyone doing anything that is accredited. And obviously, we know that's no longer going to be an issue, which is great. People will kind of, if they're going to adopt the scheme in the manner in which it's intended, people were probably doing that with the old scheme, and they were doing the 16 hours and it was relevant. And if they needed to do more because they felt like they needed it, I'm sure they were. Whereas, there are, we know of some who, as I said, would just do anything. If a solicitor determined that they didn't need to do any training, that they'd had a look and thought, no, I don't have any learning and development needs, and that is a attitude which we've come across, particularly with more experienced practitioners who perhaps think, I'm great at my job, I know what I'm doing, that's it.
Yeah.
Now there isn't a mandatory requirement. If they can show, I sort of apply it to maths. If you can show that, you've got you working out, you don't necessarily have to come out to the right answer. If they can document, well, I've done that. I think it's just this idea of, there's no prescribed way in terms of how people want it documented. It's not going to be spot checked by the SRA. I think just that level of, the SRA have made it so flexible and open, which in some ways is great. It's almost gone maybe too far, to leaving solicitors up to their own devices. And the reaction that we've got from people who still seem to think, even though the SRA has been pushing this since it was, voluntary opt-in, and I think it was April 2015, it's not the end of potentially training. Maybe the ways that you do things, or you address your needs has changed. But it's not a case of you no longer need to do anything. And I think that is still quite worrying from our perspective, that, obviously we're trying to get that message out. The SRA have been banging the drum about that, and it's still, almost like this get out of jail free card for people, that they've heard it and now they just don't want to think that they need to do anything.
I think that's right to a large extent, and I think that uh, a lot of fans out there are a little bit confused. So worst case scenario, this is a multi-million-pound claim, and the law firm reputational damage just can't recover from it, and they decide to close the practice. You could then potentially have SRA and disciplinary issues. Both the entity and the individual involved. If you have a claim resulting from a gap in the knowledge of the law, that is what your professional indemnity insurance is there for. And there is this expectation and this assumption that if you are a professional advisor giving advice on property law or litigation, family law, whatever it may be, that you have the required expertise to be giving that advice. And the whole purpose of the minimum terms and conditions is to protect the public against things like that. Now, obviously, there's been recent case law where insurance has been heavily relied upon, and I think it is relied upon the fact that insurers generally they can invoke the reimbursement provisions within the policy because it is notoriously expensive to do that, and proving that had a solicitor attended a training course on a new employment piece of legislation, that they would have picked up on the law and they wouldn't have made the mistake that caused the loss to the insurer. That's notoriously difficult to prove. But whereas what we won't get, because I don't think we'll ever get to the situation where the SRA confirmed that as a participating insurer that signs up to the qualifying insurers agreement or the participating insurers agreement, that an insurer can ever avoid a claim ab initio. I don't think they'll ever be able to do that. And likewise, I don't think you'll ever be able to avoid a policy for kind of dishonesty and stuff like that, because the ultimate premise behind it is consumer protection, and that will always prevail. That said, what I think you might have is the risk that that firm will then face challenges getting professional indemnity insurance. So, say for instance, you're insured with travellers, for instance, and you have a claim, and it turns out that your solicitor just hasn't undergone any training in the last 12 months, and it's caused insurers a complete loss, not capable of being rectified. Because it's a mislimitation date, the courts have come down hard on it, and the solicitor, as a result, faces a claim which the insurer has to pay out plus defence costs. Whilst the claim will be covered, the consumer will be protected, and it's unlikely that the insurer will sue the firm for reimbursement. Where the real risk comes from is them getting renewal terms. Because why would an insurer want to insure a firm that isn't investing in their team? They're not investing in training. They're not identifying gaps in knowledge and things like that. So it makes it more risky from an underwriting perspective, rather than this claim might not be covered if I don't go on a training course.
Have you found that some companies are more mindful of the change, and they're asking firms, how, like, what systems they have in place to make sure, they're sort of monitoring? Obviously, it was, for so long it was just a case of, solicitors need to do this and sign it off. But with the declaration they're being asked to make now, it's just that they've considered and addressed their learning needs, but it's not that they're competent, if you see what I mean. So, by the time somebody signs their declaration, they could still have needs outstanding. I appreciate it's a rolling process, but I just wondered, is there any sort of consideration of what firms are doing to monitor this, to kind of reassure companies?
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, and I think that the SRA think that this is a very good idea, and obviously it faced criticism when they initially suggested it, and it faced a criticism from obviously their partner, the Law Society, and the Legal Services Board, and because there is this worry that people won't reflect, and as you alluded to earlier, highly experienced professional, been in private practice for 35 years, partner in a law firm, isn't going to necessarily agree that they should go on a training course, because many areas of law haven't really changed in the last 50 years. Now, case law comes in and it creates new risks and it creates new exposures, but the fundamental premise of the law and statute and some of the old case law authorities haven't really changed. But things do happen, and I think the point is that clients' requests become more unusual and they're more demanding. So whereas before it was a case you could go to a lawyer and you'd accept, well, no, you can't do that, Mrs. Smith, and you'd kind of accept that. Now there's this constant challenge, and because of the amount of information that is available, lawyers are expected to know an awful lot more than they perhaps were like 50 years ago. They're expected to know of all the different case law and all the different opinions on that case law. They're expected to know kind of what forums are going on. To come back to your question, now we haven't seen this year's proposal form yet. I suspect that the questions may have changed slightly because obviously it's no longer relevant, really, or perhaps actually it's more relevant, the number of CPD hours you've recorded, albeit the traditional point system has gone away. Many training companies will still say, if you are still recording it by way of CPD, this would accrue to like 1 hour or whatever it may be. So we haven't seen so many of the insurers really focus on it. There is this expectation by every insurer that participates in this market that you have to reflect, you have to think about what is actually required. And there's this whole underlying method that you have to plan, do, study, and then act. And that's what the SRA are trying to achieve by signing this declaration to say that you have actually reflected and undertaken relevant training to address the identified learning and development needs. You're saying you've done it. It's like, yes, I've confirmed that I've done that, and you're basically saying I am competent. As far as I've seen, there's not going to be like a big questionnaire that essentially says, please tell us if you've identified ongoing needs. And even if they did, you wouldn't have the SRA hasn't got the capacity to monitor that and to follow it up and to properly control that process. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a reliance on insurers to vet it and to ultimately ask questions. But most professional indemnity claims come from processes So they come from things like missed limitation dates, poor diary management, poor drafting, your typical too much work, and just not enough time to dedicate the proper resource and the proper time and expertise to it. So actually, insurers tend to focus on that more than whether a solicitor has attended a training course, because whilst there are claims, of course there are, from lawyers interpreting the law wrong or just completely missing the fact that they're acting on an old precedent or similar. In reality, it's more important for insurers to find out what the case management processes are, what the risk management processes are. And of course, a part of that, you're expected to tell insurers that you're undertaking training and that you invest in this and everything else. So it's a whole mixed bag of information.
The competence statement could be said to be more geared towards those other types of claims then, because when you look at the 4 areas that the SRA have identified that make a competent practitioner, only one of them actually deals with, the technical legal knowledge side of things, which is obviously what the 16 hours was there to address. Now, obviously, you do have, what is your role as a solicitor, how you manage yourself and your workload, which, as you've said, would come into things like time management and what are your personal skills and do they need to be, developed. It's not just, about, are you up to date with your, case law or whatever. And I think that's maybe the element that people are struggling with more than, have you been on a 6-hour update course or have you watched a webinar? It's, are your skills as good as they can be? Are you, spending the time to address things that maybe to you might not seem that crucial, like sort of say time management, case file management, that kind of thing. I
think that the real risk with this new approach is time management, and you cannot avoid that because solicitors are notoriously busy, and the SRA are notoriously bad for kind of regulating this kind of activity. And we've seen situations in the past where they've brought something in and then they've perhaps tried to over-regulate it and gone a bit too far. And I remember a few years ago now when entity-based regulation first came in, and I remember reading about a 7-partner law firm where the actions of one consultant was imputed to the other 7 partners as the managers of the law firm, and this action, that there was no criticism of supervision or anything like that. It was just a case of, well, if one of you has done this, then surely it's the entity's fault, and they went too far. And in that example, the only people that won were the lawyers and the barristers that got appointed to actually fight the case to the end. The law firm certainly lost out because their reputation was dragged through the press, and it was very public what had happened to them. And the SRA lost because they were just made to look a little bit silly, really, because ultimately they backed down and conceded that they'd handled it in the wrong way. I do think that this will be policed by the firms themselves. I think that prudent firms out there take training and development and investment in their staff very, very seriously anyway. And I think that we're trying to mitigate against the minority of law firms, maybe the long-standing partner, perhaps a a smaller law firm that's been successfully running their business for 20 plus years, never had a claim, never had a complaint, never made a mistake in the law, that will sit back and basically say, I'm good at what I do. Why should I pay out for a training course when the last 4 I attended, I didn't learn anything? And that's the problem with this system, because those firms that have probably done over and above the required CPD for several years, actively do kind of team training on a regular basis, perhaps even consult an external supplier of training that kind of identifies, almost does this new CPD requirement for them, identifies what they may need and sets out this training plan. Firms have had that in place even under the old regime, and of course they don't need to worry. They can just breathe easy and think, we invest a significant amount of money on training every year, and we're confident that we address this adequately in our appraisals, and we make sure that any training needs that are identified within that appraisal are done within a 12-month period. And I guess the whole requirement is that as long as you are continually reflecting on what's needed, I'm guessing that 12 months is maybe acceptable. What probably isn't acceptable is if you identify that you need to go on an accounts course in April 2016 and we get to April 2019 and it's appeared as the same training need for the last 3 years. And of course the excuse is, it's just been crazy. So I can't see it having a huge impact on the profession, because I think most of them already do a sterling job and take training and their own team's professional development very, very seriously.
Brilliant. We've kind of wandered through probably several of the questions there into one big ball of a topic. Do you mind if we just whip through the questions as they are? So, is that okay? And then if anything comes about, or if we've already covered it, then that's fine. Okay, so how will the SRA changes come into play in the insurance market?
I think it remains to be seen how it will ultimately come into play. I think that some insurers will be more proactive than others, but insurers are trusting that law firms understand what they need to do, that they have read the consultation paper, that they have read the requirements, and that if they don't understand what is required, they have taken advantage of that, whether that be from a training company or whether that be from the SRA directly. There is an awful lot of material on the SRA website with kind of training plans and CPD kind of new ways to record and reflect and state and record what you're actually doing. But we're not seeing a major shift in attitude to training from an insurance perspective at the moment.
Right, okay, thank you. What effect do you think this will have on insurance and insurance renewals for solicitors? Again, I'd imagine we'll wait and see how it develops, perhaps.
Yeah, I think there is an element of that, and I think I said before that it's kind of balancing your risk profile with insurers. You are making a serious declaration to the SRA that you have reflected and considered and really given thought about what is actually required for a tailor-made training package for your firm, what you actually need. And I think provided you can show that you've done that, then you can't really be criticised. Of course, you come back to the classic big mistake on a claim, and you can't rectify it. Insurers have to pay out, and the claims handler or the claims solicitor at the insurer identifies that they should have really been aware of said bit of legislation, which changes the rules, and they flag it then as an underwriting issue. I think that people and firms that have been committed to serious development and ongoing training will continue to undertake the meaningful training, and they will be able to submit the annual declaration at the end of this indemnity year with their practice and certificate renewals, and they will be able to tick the box confidently, knowing that they do a good job on training and they've got a workforce that appreciate that investment in training. So I think it's important. It's just so important that firms can continue with that, but that they document it, because as we all know, if it's not written down, when it comes to a claim or it comes to a dispute, it didn't happen. And if you get into a situation where, well, I reflected on it, Mr. SRA, well, you didn't write it down, and now you've caused a catastrophic loss to insurers, which has resulted in the firm being intervened. Clearly you didn't reflect. So record keeping is absolutely paramount in everything that a law firm does. It's just so important. Well, I think that it's interesting, isn't it? Because this is actually quite comparable to what the SRA introduced when they introduced the roles of the CULP and the COFA, and the reporting of material breaches and minor breaches and I can't remember the other phraseology. But there was no guidance, and firms were very much left to their own devices. And it's like, well, we had 2p in our client account, and it should have been in another account, or we held £5 for a week longer than we should have. And it's all reconciled and it's all absolutely fine, and it's certainly not going to cause a professional indemnity claim, and it's certainly not going to cause an intervention. But technically, the SRA, because they'd left it so wide and so open for interpretation, solicitors didn't have a clue what they were supposed to do. And I think there's a real risk in this. Agree? I agree.
Final question, which again I think we may have covered, but will individual solicitors be affected, or firms as a whole? So in terms of I don't know, you go. Is it individuals, or is it always going to come down to the firm?
I think it's going to be both, because ultimately, as an individual, you have to identify what you need. Your line manager or the partner that directly supervises you may be able to say to you, I think it would be helpful for you to attend a course on money laundering, so that you could perhaps be the deputy. And there may be training requirements that your manager wants an individual to do, rather than what the individual thinks he or she needs. And I think it's so important, both communication to identify it has to be a two-way street. In terms of kind of repercussions, I think that a lot is managed from the top down. So if you've got a partner in a law firm that is very aware that the firm is experiencing cash flow issues and is therefore not asking a solicitor if they need training, for fear that solicitor will say, well, actually, I need a 3-day refresher course on conveyancing, and that's going to cost £1,500, please. And they know that they can't afford that. There's a real conflict of interest, and actually, the individual solicitor can take proactive steps to improve their knowledge. There's a lot of information out there, but ultimately it would be quite unfair in that situation for the partner in the law firm or the manager in the law firm not to be criticised for not introducing an effective system to enable her to reflect, or not asking required questions because the firm's finances, or he just doesn't want her out of the office for a couple of days, or whatever it may be. So I think it's both.
I also think it's both. I think there's a fine line between the SRA saying, it's up to individuals, and you've got to be able to demonstrate you're providing a proper standard of service to your clients. But then obviously there is also the responsibility of the firm and managers to make sure that individuals are trained, to maintain the level of competence for the role that they're doing and the level of responsibility that they have. So, and obviously, if it was going to be any sort of consequences, you've said in terms of, say worst case scenario with their insurance, that's going to impact, the solicitor's actions is going to impact on the firm as a whole. It's not just something.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've had a pretty comprehensive discussion about it.
I'm sorry for keeping you so long.
No, that's absolutely fine.
Well, no, thank you so much for your time. I do really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Speak
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye.
Bye. That is something that we have stressed to our customers. Hi, I'm Catherine Jordan. I am the Research and Development Manager here at DataLaw, and I am speaking with Samantha Pye, who is a Vice President of Global Professional and Financial Risk at Lockton, who are the UK's leading supplier of solicitor professional indemnity insurance. So, Sam, do people worry about the insurance implication of the new SRA changes?
There has been kind of a proven track record that some...
Good afternoon, everybody, and that was Samantha Pye, Vice President at Lockton Insurance, for those of you who missed the start of the call. Thank you very much for joining us in that today, Samantha. It was really interesting to have her here on the call with us today, because Samantha has over 14 years experience, and she specialised in professional indemnity insurance for that time. So some really valuable input from her there, and thank you again. I think some of the key points that have come through there is that there is a certain level of expectation that solicitors and co-ops will have a level of responsibility for ensuring that training needs are invested in and met. Were there any particular questions that anybody had off the back of that conversation at all? Feel free to type your comments in the comment section there. Nothing so far. Okay, we'll see if there were any that come across on email, but just touching on a few points. The main thing is to make sure that your individuals are invested in terms of training, and you have that planned out adequately. Now we have a system that will enable you to do that. There's some actual free tools when you register with DataLaw, like having a personal development plan, taking your self-assessment in there. As I say, that is free to use to help you to get on track. that training plan will then put you in the right direction in terms of what training you should be undergoing in order to make sure that you are compliant with the SRA's new regime and the resulting training packages that you can have as part of a collective firm or as an individual that you can purchase afterwards. Nothing so far. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up because the call just went on for a little bit longer than expected as well. I'm conscious we took up quite a bit of Samantha's time. So we're going to wrap it up today, but if anybody would like to get in touch, just give us a call. The number here for the main office in CPD Specialist is 0151 242 0064. My name is Angela. I'm in charge of the implementation of the SRA Safe Learning Management System for data law clients. So if you have any immediate questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you as well. www.DatalawOnline.co.uk, and if you need any advice, just let us know. Thank you everybody for joining today.